It was a cold, rainy evening, and the streets were nearly empty. The young man sat alone in a small diner, staring at the steam rising from his cup of coffee. He wasn't rich, not even close. In fact, he was barely getting by. His job at the local garage paid just enough to cover rent and groceries, but not much else. Life had been hard, and he often wondered if things would ever change. As he sipped his coffee, his eyes wandered to an elderly couple sitting a few tables away. They looked tired, their clothes worn but clean. The man had a kind face, though his shoulders were hunched as if carrying the weight of the world. The woman sat quietly, her hands folded on the table, her eyes fixed on the menu. They spoke in hushed tones, their voices barely audible over the soft hum of the diner. The young man couldn't help but notice the worry in their eyes. The elderly man pulled out a small, crumpled envelope from his pocket and carefully counted the bills inside. His hands trembled slightly as he placed the money on the table, whispering something to his wife. She nodded, but her face was etched with concern. Something about the scene tugged at the young man's heart. He had been raised to believe in kindness, even when it wasn't easy. His parents had always told him, "You never know how much a small act of goodness can mean to someone." He didn't have much, but he had enough to cover their meal. Without a second thought, he stood up and walked over to the counter. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile, greeted him. "Can I get you something else, hon?" she asked. "No, thank you," he replied, glancing back at the elderly couple. "But I'd like to pay for their meal. Whatever they're having, put it on my bill." The waitress raised an eyebrow, surprised. "That's mighty kind of you," she said, nodding approvingly. "They've been coming here for years. Good people, just going through a rough patch." The young man paid the bill, leaving a small tip for the waitress. As he turned to leave, he caught a glimpse of the elderly couple's faces. They were smiling now, their worries momentarily lifted. He didn't stay to introduce himself or explain his actions. He simply walked out into the rain, feeling a strange sense of peace. Weeks passed, and life went on as usual. The young man continued his routine, working long hours at the garage and trying to make ends meet. He didn't think much about that night at the diner. To him, it was just a small act of kindness, something anyone would have done. But one evening, as he returned home from work, he found a letter waiting for him. It was an expensive-looking envelope, the kind he had never seen before. His name was written in elegant handwriting, and there was no return address. Curious, he opened it and began to read. "Dear Sir, I am writing to you regarding an act of kindness you performed several weeks ago. Your selflessness did not go unnoticed, and I believe you are exactly the kind of person I have been searching for. I would like to meet with you to discuss an opportunity that could change your life forever. Please come to the address below at your earliest convenience. I assure you, this is not a joke. Sincerely, a grateful observer." The young man read the letter twice, his heart pounding in his chest. Who was this person? How did they know about what he had done? And what kind of opportunity were they talking about? His mind raced with questions, but one thing was clear, he had to find out more. The address led him to a grand mansion on the outskirts of the city. It was a place he had only seen in movies, with tall gates, manicured gardens, and a driveway that seemed to go on forever. He stood at the entrance, clutching the letter in his hand, unsure of what to do. The rain had started again, and the sound of it hitting the pavement echoed in the silence. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the buzzer on the gate. A voice crackled through the intercom. "Yes? I'm here to see the owner of the house," the young man stammered. "I received a letter." There was a pause, and then the gate slowly creaked open. The young man stepped inside, his shoes crunching on the gravel path. As he approached the mansion, the front door opened, and a tall, distinguished man in his late 60s appeared. He had sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, but there was something mysterious about him. "Welcome," the man said, extending his hand. "I've been expecting you." The young man shook his hand, still unsure of what was happening. "Who are you?" he asked. "And why did you send me that letter?" The man smiled faintly. "All in good time. Come inside, and we'll talk." The young man followed him into the mansion, his heart racing. The interior was even more impressive than the outside, with high ceilings, antique furniture, and artwork that looked like it belonged in a museum. They walked into a spacious study, where a fire crackled in the fireplace. "Please, sit down," the man said, gesturing to a chair. "I have a proposition for you, one that I believe will interest you greatly." The young man sat down, his mind spinning. He had no idea what was coming next, but he knew one thing for sure: his life was about to change forever. The young man sat in the plush chair, his hands gripping the armrests as he looked around the study. The room was filled with books, maps, and strange gadgets he couldn't even begin to understand. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The elderly man sat across from him, his piercing eyes studying the young man carefully. "You must be wondering why you're here," the millionaire began, his voice calm but commanding. "Let me start by saying that what you did that night at the diner was no small thing. In a world where people often look out only for themselves, your act of kindness stood out." The young man shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "It was nothing, really. I saw they were struggling, and I wanted to help." The millionaire leaned forward, his expression serious. "That nothing, as you call it, is everything. It shows character, compassion, and a willingness to put others before yourself. Qualities that are rare these days." The young man didn't know how to respond. He had never thought of himself as special or extraordinary. He was just a regular guy trying to get by. "I still don't understand," he said finally. "Why did you bring me here?" The millionaire stood up and walked over to a large window, looking out at the rain-soaked garden. "I've been watching you for some time," he admitted. "Not in a creepy way, mind you. But I have a network of people who keep an eye out for individuals like you. People who have the potential to make a real difference in the world." The young man's eyes widened. "You've been watching me?" The millionaire turned to face him, a faint smile on his lips. "Yes. And what I've seen has convinced me that you are exactly the kind of person I need for a very special project." "What kind of project?" the young man asked, his curiosity piqued. The millionaire walked back to his chair and sat down, folding his hands on the table. "It's a project that could change the course of humanity. A project that involves advanced technology, innovation, and a mission to save lives on a scale you can't even imagine." The young man's heart raced. This sounded like something out of a movie, not real life. "I don't know anything about technology or saving lives," he said hesitantly. "I'm just a mechanic." The millionaire chuckled softly. "You underestimate yourself. This project isn't just about technical skills. It's about heart, integrity, and the willingness to do what's right. Those are qualities that can't be taught." He paused, his expression growing serious again. "Let me explain. For years, I've been working on a device that can predict and prevent disasters. Natural disasters, accidents, even man-made catastrophes. This device has the potential to save millions of lives, but it's not yet ready for the world. It needs someone like you to help bring it to life." The young man stared at him, trying to process what he was hearing. "You're saying this device can predict the future?" "In a way, yes," the millionaire replied. "It uses advanced algorithms and data analysis to identify patterns and predict potential disasters before they happen. But it's not just about the technology. It's about the people behind it. People who care enough to use it for good." The young man felt a mix of excitement and fear. This was beyond anything he had ever imagined. "Why me?" he asked quietly. "There are so many people smarter, more qualified." "Because you have something they don't," the millionaire interrupted. "You have a good heart. And in a world where power can corrupt, that's the most important quality of all." The room fell silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire. The young man's mind raced. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but it also felt overwhelming. He had no idea what he was getting into. I don't know, he said finally. This is a lot to take in. The millionaire nodded understandingly. I don't expect you to decide right now. Take some time to think about it. You have 24 hours to make your decision. If you choose to join me, your life will never be the same. But if you walk away, I'll respect your choice, and you'll never hear from me again. He handed the young man a small card with a phone number on it. Call me when you've made up your mind. The young man took the card, his hands trembling slightly. He stood up, feeling a strange mix of emotions, excitement, fear, and a glimmer of hope. Thank you, he said quietly. I'll think about it. The millionaire smiled faintly. I hope you make the right choice. For yourself, and for the world. As the young man walked out of the mansion and into the rain, his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. He had no idea what the future held, but one thing was certain, his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. The young man walked home in the rain, his mind racing. The millionaire's words echoed in his head, your life will never be the same. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at a crossroads, and the choice he made would define the rest of his life. When he reached his small apartment, he sat down on the edge of his bed, still clutching the card the millionaire had given him. The room felt quieter than usual, as if the walls themselves were waiting for his decision. He stared at the card, the phone number staring back at him like a gateway to another world. What should I do? He whispered to himself. He thought about his life so far. It hadn't been easy. He had grown up in a modest neighborhood, where opportunities were scarce. His parents had worked hard to provide for him, but they had always struggled to make ends meet. He had dreamed of doing something meaningful with his life, but those dreams had slowly faded as the years went by. Now, he was just a mechanic, fixing cars, and barely scraping by. But this offer, it was unlike anything he had ever imagined. A chance to be part of something bigger, something that could change the world. The idea was thrilling, but also terrifying. He had no experience with advanced technology or global missions. What if he wasn't good enough? What if he failed? He lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling. The rain outside had turned into a steady downpour, the sound of it tapping against the window soothing his nerves. He closed his eyes and tried to clear his mind, but the millionaire's words kept coming back to him. You have a good heart. And in a world where power can corrupt, that's the most important quality of all. Was that really enough? Could kindness and compassion really make a difference in a world filled with greed and selfishness? He thought about the elderly couple at the diner. Their smiles had been so genuine, so full of gratitude. That small act of kindness had brought them joy, even if just for a moment. Maybe that was what mattered, doing what he could, when he could, to make the world a little better. But this project, it was on a completely different scale. It wasn't just about helping one or two people. It was about saving lives, preventing disasters, changing the course of history. Could he really handle that kind of responsibility? The hours passed, and the young man still couldn't make up his mind. He thought about calling his parents for advice, but he knew they would tell him to follow his heart. The problem was, he wasn't sure what his heart was saying. Finally, as the first light of dawn began to creep through the window, he made his decision. He picked up his phone and dialed the number on the card. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. I'm in, he said when the millionaire answered. I'll join your project. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then the millionaire's voice came through, calm and reassuring. I'm glad to hear that. Come to the mansion at noon. We have a lot to discuss. The young man hung up and took a deep breath. He didn't know what he was getting into, but he knew one thing for sure, his life was about to change in ways he couldn't even imagine. When he arrived at the mansion later that day, the millionaire greeted him with a warm smile. Welcome, he said. I knew you would make the right choice. The young man followed him into the study, where a group of people were waiting. There were scientists, engineers, and other professionals, all working on various aspects of the project. The millionaire introduced him to the team, and they welcomed him with nods and smiles. "This is where the magic happens," the millionaire said, gesturing to the room. "And now, you're a part of it." The young man felt a surge of excitement and nervousness. He had no idea what the future held, but he was ready to find out. The young man stood in the middle of the mansion's high-tech laboratory, surrounded by screens, gadgets, and machines that looked like they belonged in a sci-fi movie. The air buzzed with energy as the team of scientists and engineers worked tirelessly, their faces lit by the glow of monitors. He felt out of place, like a small fish in a vast ocean, but the millionaire's reassuring presence kept him grounded. "This is where it all begins," the millionaire said, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. "You're about to see things that will challenge everything you thought you knew about the world." The young man nodded, trying to hide his nervousness. "Where do I start?" The millionaire smiled. "With the basics. You don't need to be a scientist to understand the heart of this project. What you need is curiosity, determination, and an open mind." Over the next few weeks, the young man underwent intense training. He learned about the device the team was building, a revolutionary piece of technology called the predictor. It was designed to analyze vast amounts of data, from weather patterns to seismic activity, and predict potential disasters before they happened. The goal was to give people enough time to evacuate, prepare, or even prevent the disaster altogether. At first, the young man struggled to keep up. The technical jargon and complex concepts were overwhelming, but the team was patient with him. They explained things in simple terms, breaking down the science into bite-sized pieces. Slowly but surely, he began to understand how the predictor worked. One day, during a training session, one of the scientists showed him a simulation of the device in action. On the screen, a map of the world lit up with glowing dots, each representing a potential disaster. The predictor analyzed the data and highlighted a region at risk of a devastating earthquake. "This is incredible," the young man said, his eyes wide with amazement. "You could save so many lives with this." The scientist nodded. "That's the plan. But it's not just about predicting disasters. It's about how we use that information. That's where you come in." The young man frowned. "What do you mean?" "The predictor is just a tool," the scientist explained. "It's up to people like you to decide how to use it. That's why the millionaire chose you. He believes you have the heart and the moral compass to make the right decisions." The young man felt a surge of pride but also a heavy sense of responsibility. He had never thought of himself as a decision-maker, but now, he realized that his choices could have a global impact. As the days went by, the young man began to notice something strange. The millionaire was always calm and composed, but there were moments when he seemed distant. He would often disappear into a private room, locking the door behind him. The team members exchanged knowing glances, but never said a word. One evening, after a long day of training, the young man decided to ask one of the engineers about it. "Does the millionaire always keep to himself like that?" he asked casually. The engineer hesitated, then lowered his voice. "He's a private man. But there's more to it than that. He's been through a lot. Lost his family in a disaster years ago. That's why he's so passionate about this project." The young man's heart ached for the millionaire. He couldn't imagine the pain of losing loved ones in such a tragic way. It explained why the man was so driven, but it also made him wonder if there was more to the story. One night, as the young man was leaving the lab, he noticed a light coming from under the door of the millionaire's private room. Curiosity got the better of him, and he quietly approached the door. He could hear faint voices inside, but he couldn't make out what they were saying. Suddenly, the door opened, and the millionaire stepped out, his expression unreadable. "Is something wrong?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The young man stammered, caught off guard. I just wanted to ask if there was anything else I could do to help." The millionaire studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Your dedication is admirable. But remember, some doors are best left unopened." Focus on your training. That's where you're needed most. The young man nodded, feeling a mix of guilt and curiosity. He returned to his room, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the project, and the millionaire then met the eye. The day of the first test arrived, and the atmosphere in the mansion was electric. The team had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and now it was time to see if the predictor could live up to its promise. The young man stood in the control room, his heart pounding as he watched the scientists and engineers make their final adjustments. The millionaire entered the room, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Today, we make history," he said, his voice steady but filled with quiet excitement. "The predictor will show us what it's capable of. Let's not disappoint." The young man glanced at the millionaire, noticing the intensity in his eyes. There was something almost obsessive about the man's determination, but he pushed the thought aside. This was a big day, and he needed to focus. The test began. The predictor analyzed data from satellites, sensors, and other sources, creating a real-time map of potential disaster zones. The young man watched in awe as the device highlighted a region in the Pacific Ocean, predicting a massive tsunami that could devastate coastal communities. "We need to alert the authorities," one of the scientists said urgently. "If we act now, we can save thousands of lives." The millionaire nodded. "Do it. This is what we've been working for." The team sprang into action, sending warnings to governments and emergency services in the affected area. Within hours, evacuation efforts were underway, and the young man felt a surge of pride. They were making a difference. They were saving lives. But as the hours passed, something strange began to happen. The young man started experiencing vivid, unsettling visions. He saw flashes of destruction, cities crumbling, people screaming, chaos everywhere. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, but the visions grew more intense, more real. He approached one of the scientists, a kind woman named Dr. Patel, and told her what was happening. "I don't know if it's stress or something else, but I keep seeing things, terrible things." Dr. Patel frowned, her expression concerned. "That's unusual. The predictor shouldn't have any side effects on its users. Let me run some tests." She conducted a series of scans and tests, but everything came back normal. "There's nothing physically wrong with you," she said finally. "But I'll keep an eye on it. If the visions continue, let me know." The young man nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night, as he lay in bed, the visions returned, more intense than ever. He saw the millionaire standing in the middle of a ruined city, a cold smile on his face. The image was so vivid, so real, that it jolted him awake. He sat up, his heart racing, and decided to confront the millionaire. He found him in the study, staring at a map of the world with a strange, almost predatory look in his eyes. "We need to talk," the young man said, his voice firm. The millionaire turned to him, his expression calm. "What's on your mind?" "These visions, they're not normal. I think the predictor is doing something to me. To all of us." The millionaire's eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice remained steady. "The predictor is a powerful tool. It's possible that your mind is struggling to process the information it's receiving. But don't worry. You'll adjust in time." The young man wasn't convinced. What if it's more than that? What if the device is changing us? The millionaire stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "Change is inevitable. But it's up to us to decide how we use it. The predictor is a force for good. Don't let fear cloud your judgment." The young man wanted to believe him, but the visions and the millionaire's cryptic words left him uneasy. He decided to dig deeper, to find out what was really going on. The next day, he secretly accessed the predictor's database, searching for any hidden files or encrypted data. What he found shocked him. There were records of experiments, failed tests, and even reports of people experiencing severe psychological effects after using the device. The predictor wasn't just a tool for predicting disasters, it was something far more dangerous. He confronted the millionaire again, this time with the evidence in hand. You lied to me, he said, his voice trembling with anger. This device, it's not just about saving lives. It's about control. About power. The millionaire's calm demeanor cracked, and for the first time, the young man saw a flicker of anger in his eyes. You don't understand, the millionaire said coldly. The world is broken. People are selfish, short-sighted. They need someone to guide them. To make the hard decisions. The young man shook his head, his heart heavy with disappointment. That's not your call to make. You can't play God. The millionaire's expression hardened. I'm doing what's necessary. If you can't see that, then you're not the person I thought you were. The young man realized then that he had to stop the millionaire, no matter the cost. But he knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed help. The young man sat alone in his room, staring at the evidence he had uncovered. The files on the predictor revealed a chilling truth. The device wasn't just designed to predict disasters, it was also capable of manipulating events. The millionaire had been using it to create controlled crises, forcing governments and corporations to rely on him for solutions. It was a web of power and control, and the young man had unknowingly become a part of it. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the files. There were records of manipulated weather patterns, engineered economic collapses, and even staged accidents. The millionaire wasn't a savior, he was a puppet master, pulling the strings of the world from behind the scenes. The young man's heart ached with betrayal. He had trusted the millionaire, believed in his vision of a better world. But now, he saw the truth, the man was no different from the selfish, power-hungry individuals he claimed to despise. He knew he had to act. He couldn't let the millionaire continue his dangerous game. But he also knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed allies, people who could help him expose the truth and shut down the predictor for good. The next morning, he approached Dr. Patel, the scientist who had helped him earlier. He showed her the files, watching as her expression shifted from confusion to horror. This can't be real, she whispered, her voice trembling. We were supposed to be saving lives, not playing God. It's real, the young man said grimly. And if we don't stop him, it's only going to get worse. Dr. Patel hesitated, then nodded. You're right. We can't let this continue. But we need to be careful. The millionaire has eyes and ears everywhere. If he finds out what we're planning. I know, the young man said. That's why we need to move quickly. Together, they began to quietly recruit others from the team who shared their concerns. It wasn't easy, many were loyal to the millionaire, blinded by his charisma and promises of a better world. But a few, like Dr. Patel, were willing to risk everything to do what was right. As they worked in secret, the young man couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The mansion, once a place of wonder and innovation, now felt like a prison. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper in the hallway, set his nerves on edge. One night, as he was transferring the files to a secure device, he heard footsteps outside his door. He froze, his heart pounding. The doorknob turned slowly, and the millionaire stepped inside. I thought we had an understanding, the millionaire said, his voice cold and measured. But it seems I was wrong. The young man stood his ground, though his legs felt like they might give out. You lied to me. To all of us. This project, it's not about saving lives. It's about control. The millionaire's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the young man saw a flicker of something dark and dangerous in his gaze. You think you understand, but you don't. The world is chaos. People are weak, selfish, incapable of making the right choices. Someone has to take control. Someone has to guide them. That's not your decision to make, the young man shot back. You don't get to decide what's best for everyone. The millionaire stepped closer, his voice low and menacing. And what will you do? Expose me? Destroy everything we've built? Do you really think the world is ready for the truth? The young man clenched his fists, his fear giving way to anger. I don't know if they're ready. But I do know this, what you're doing is wrong. And I won't let you get away with it. The millionaire studied him for a long moment, then sighed. I had such high hopes for you. But if you're determined to stand in my way, then so be it. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving the young man alone with his thoughts. The confrontation had left him shaken, but also more determined than ever. He knew the millionaire wouldn't let him go easily. He had to act fast. The next day, the young man and his small group of allies put their plan into action. They began sabotaging the predictor, deleting critical data, and disabling key systems. It was risky, but they had no other choice. They couldn't let the device fall into the wrong hands. As they worked, the young man couldn't help but think about the elderly couple from the diner. They had been the reason he had joined this project in the first place. He had wanted to make a difference, to help people like them. But now, he realized that true change didn't come from controlling the world. It came from small acts of kindness, from people helping each other in times of need. He vowed to honor that truth, no matter what happened next. The young man and his small group of allies moved quickly through the mansion's labyrinthine halls, their footsteps echoing in the silence. They had managed to disable parts of the predictor, but they knew the millionaire would soon discover their sabotage. Time was running out. We need to get out of here, Dr. Patel whispered, her voice tense. If he catches us, there's no telling what he'll do. The young man nodded, clutching the secure device containing the evidence they had gathered. We'll head for the garage. There's a car we can use to get to the city. Once we're there, we can contact the authorities. As they turned a corner, they heard voices approaching. The young man gestured for the group to hide, and they ducked into a nearby storage room. Through the crack in the door, they saw two of the millionaire's security guards walking past, their radios crackling with static. He wants them found, one of the guards said. No one leaves the mansion. The young man's heart raced. The millionaire was already onto them. They had to move faster. Once the guards were out of sight, the group slipped out of the storage room and continued toward the garage. The mansion felt like a maze, every hallway and door a potential trap. But the young man had spent enough time there to know the layout by heart. He led the way, his mind focused on one goal, getting the evidence to the outside world. When they finally reached the garage, they found it guarded. Two more security men stood by the door, their arms crossed and their eyes scanning the area. We'll have to distract them, the young man whispered. Dr. Patel, you and the others get the car ready. I'll handle the guards. Before anyone could argue, he stepped out into the open, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. Hey! I'm here. You don't need to look for me anymore. The guards turned, their expressions hardening. Stay where you are, one of them ordered, reaching for his radio. The young man took a deep breath, then charged at them. He wasn't a fighter, but desperation gave him strength. He tackled one of the guards, knocking him to the ground, while the other fumbled with his radio. Dr. Patel and the others rushed in, helping to subdue the guards. Let's go, the young man shouted, grabbing the keys from the guard's belt. They piled into a sleek black car, the young man taking the wheel. He revved the engine and sped out of the garage, the tires screeching against the pavement. Behind them, they could hear alarms blaring and voices shouting. They're coming after us, Dr. Patel said, glancing out the rear window. We'll never make it to the city. The young man gripped the steering wheel tighter, his mind racing. We don't need to make it to the city. We just need to get far enough to send the evidence. He pulled out his phone and connected it to the secure device. With a few quick taps, he uploaded the files to a secure server and sent them to a trusted journalist he had contacted earlier. The message was simple: this is the truth. Please share it with the world. As they drove, the millionaire's security team closed in. Cars appeared in the rearview mirror, their headlights glaring like the eyes of a predator. The young man pushed the car to its limits, weaving through narrow roads and sharp turns. We're not going to outrun them, one of the scientists said, his voice panicked. We don't need to outrun them, the young man replied. We just need to buy enough time for the truth to get out. The chase was intense, the cars behind them gaining ground with every passing second. The young man's hands were slick with sweat, but he kept his focus on the road. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. Finally, they reached a bridge overlooking a river. The young man slammed on the brakes, bringing the car to a screeching halt. "Everyone out," he shouted. "Now." The group scrambled out of the car, the young man grabbing the secure device. He led them to the edge of the bridge, where a small boat was tied to a post. It was a risky escape route, but it was their only chance. As they climbed into the boat, the Millionaire's security team arrived, their car skidding to a stop. The young man started the boat's engine and steered it away from the shore, the sound of gunfire echoing across the water. They made it to the other side of the river, exhausted but alive. The young man looked back at the mansion, now just a distant silhouette against the night sky. He knew the millionaire wouldn't stop until he had silenced them, but he also knew they had done the right thing. "The evidence is out there," he said, his voice steady. "The world will know the truth." Dr. Patel placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did it. You stood up to him. That took courage." The young man shook his head. "We did it. Together." The young man and his allies had found temporary shelter in a small, abandoned cabin deep in the woods. They were exhausted, their clothes torn and their faces smudged with dirt, but they knew they couldn't rest for long. The millionaire's reach was vast, and it was only a matter of time before he found them. As they huddled around a crackling fire, the young man checked his phone. The journalist he had contacted had responded, "The files are out. The world is waking up to the truth." A wave of relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. The millionaire wouldn't take this lying down. He would fight back, and the young man needed to be ready. "We need to confront him," the young man said, his voice firm. "We can't let him spin this in his favor. We need to end this, once and for all." Dr. Patel looked at him, her eyes filled with concern. "It's too dangerous. He'll be expecting you." "I know," the young man replied. "But I have to try. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about everyone he's hurt, and everyone he could hurt in the future." The next morning, the young man returned to the mansion alone. The gates were open, as if the millionaire had been expecting him. The security guards were nowhere to be seen, and the mansion was eerily quiet. He stepped inside, his heart pounding. The grand hall was empty, the only sound the echo of his footsteps. He made his way to the study, where he found the millionaire sitting at his desk, staring at a screen filled with news reports about the predictor. "You've caused quite a stir," the millionaire said without looking up. "The world is in chaos, thanks to you." The young man stepped closer, his hands clenched into fists. "You did this to yourself. You lied to everyone. You used the predictor to control people, to play God. I couldn't let that continue." The millionaire finally looked at him, his expression calm but his eyes burning with anger. "You think you've won? You think exposing me will change anything? The world is broken, and people like you only make it worse." "The world isn't broken," the young man shot back. "It's just complicated. And it doesn't need someone like you to fix it. It needs people who care, who are willing to help without controlling or manipulating." The millionaire stood up, his presence towering and intimidating. "You're naive. You think kindness and compassion are enough? They're not. The world needs order. It needs someone to make the hard decisions." "And what about the people who get hurt along the way?" the young man demanded. "What about the lives you've destroyed? Does that not matter to you?" The millionaire's calm facade cracked, and for a moment, the young man saw the pain and anger beneath. "You don't understand," the millionaire said, his voice trembling. "I lost everything because of this world's chaos. My family, my home. I won't let that happen to anyone else." The young man's anger softened, replaced by a pang of sympathy. "I'm sorry for what you've been through. But this isn't the way. You can't fix the world by breaking it even more." The millionaire stared at him, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he lunged forward, grabbing the young man by the collar. "You think you're so righteous? So pure? Let's see how you handle the truth." He dragged the young man to a hidden room behind the study, where a smaller version of the predictor was set up. The screen displayed a live feed of the world, with glowing dots representing potential disasters. "This is the real predictor," the millionaire said, his voice cold. "The one you sabotaged was just a decoy. And now, thanks to you, I have no choice but to accelerate my plans." The young man's heart sank. He had been outmaneuvered. But he couldn't give up. Not now. As the millionaire began typing commands into the system, the young man noticed a small, unassuming button on the side of the machine. It was labeled Emergency Shutdown. He didn't know what it would do, but he knew he had to try. Summoning all his strength, he broke free from the millionaire's grip and slammed his hand down on the button. The screen went dark, and the machine let out a low hum before powering down completely. The millionaire stared at him in shock. "What have you done?" "I've stopped you," the young man said, his voice steady. "It's over." For a moment, the millionaire looked like he might strike him. But then, his shoulders slumped, and he sank into a chair, his face filled with defeat. The mansion was silent, the hum of the predictor replaced by an eerie stillness. The young man stood over the millionaire, who sat slumped in his chair, his face a mask of defeat. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a hollow emptiness. "It's over," the young man said softly. "You can't control the world. No one can." The millionaire looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and sorrow. "You think you've won? You think shutting down the predictor will fix everything? The world is still broken. People are still selfish, still cruel. Nothing has changed." "Maybe not," the young man replied. "But change doesn't happen overnight. It starts with small acts of kindness, with people helping each other. That's how we make the world better. Not by controlling it, but by caring for it." The millionaire didn't respond. He just stared at the floor, his shoulders heavy with the weight of his choices. Outside, the authorities had arrived, alerted by the journalist who had published the evidence. They stormed the mansion, arresting the millionaire and securing the predictor. The young man watched as the man who had once seemed so powerful was led away in handcuffs, his head bowed in shame. Dr. Patel and the others emerged from their hiding places, their faces filled with relief. "You did it," Dr. Patel said, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. "You stopped him." The young man shook his head. "We did it. Together." In the weeks that followed, the world learned the truth about the predictor and the millionaire's plans. The revelation sparked outrage and debate, but they also inspired hope. People began to question the systems of power and control that had shaped their lives, and they started to look for ways to make a difference in their own communities. The young man returned to his old life, but he was no longer the same person. He had seen the best and worst of humanity, and he had learned that true change came from within. He began volunteering at local shelters, helping those in need, and spreading the message of kindness and compassion. One day, as he was walking through the city, he saw a familiar face. It was the elderly couple from the diner, sitting on a park bench and sharing a sandwich. They looked happier, their faces free of the worry he had seen that night. He approached them, a smile on his face. "Hello," he said. "Do you remember me?" The elderly man squinted at him, then his face lit up with recognition. "You're the young man who paid for our meal. We never got to thank you properly." The young man shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. I just wanted to help." The elderly woman reached out and took his hand, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You did more than help. You gave us hope. And that's something we'll never forget." The young man felt a lump in his throat. In that moment, he realized that his journey had come full circle. The small act of kindness he had performed that night had set off a chain of events that had changed his life, and the lives of countless others. As he walked away from the park, he thought about the lessons he had learned. He had seen the dangers of power and control, but he had also seen the power of kindness and compassion. He knew that the world was far from perfect, but he also knew that it was worth fighting for. He looked up at the sky, the sun breaking through the clouds, and felt a sense of peace. The future was uncertain, but he was ready to face it, not as a hero or a savior, but as someone who cared. And in that moment, he knew that was enough.